For decades, bowel cancer was considered a disease of the elderly, but a new reality is unfolding. Cases among young people are climbing at an alarming rate, forcing scientists to hunt for the genetic drivers and hidden changes within the human body. So, what are the factors behind this deadly rise? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady now. A sharp increase in bowel cancer among young people is being described by medics as a worldwide problem. Scientists warn soaring diagnoses in the under 50s are being driven by the dominance of the so-called Western diet. While smoking remains a known danger, ultra-processed foods and preservatives are also believed to be fueling this global surge.
Today's my birthday, and it has been the hardest year of my life.
I have stage 4 colon cancer.
So I was diagnosed stage 4 at the age of 38.
I thought I was healthy, and it turns out I had a massive tumour growing inside of me.
The stories of those living with bowel cancer. Mothers, fathers, well-known TV personalities, all of them are young. Bowel or colorectal cancer used to be a disease for older people, but it's increasingly impacting those under 50, with cases across Europe surging by 50%. In the US, the disease is now the biggest reason for cancer deaths. Scientists believe a combination of factors are behind the rise, from stress and environment to diet and the increase of ultra-processed foods. A major study in France has linked nitrates in cured meats to colorectal cancer. Yet the failure also lies with the lack of awareness and training for medical professionals.
We found out that in general there is a low awareness about colorectal cancer in the young population, and this added to the fact that physicians are not trained to recognize signs and symptoms of colorectal cancer in the young population.
To help uncover the mystery surrounding the rise in under 50s, British researchers are looking to the past, comparing 70-year-old tumour samples with those from today's patients. They hope to unlock the secrets of the gut and stop this global upward trend, one which is claiming young lives and impacting more and more people in their prime. Many patients are using their voices and platforms to share their cancer journey and raise awareness for a disease which can show few symptoms.
Well, let's bring in our guests. Joining me in the studio, we have James Kinross. James is a consultant surgeon at Imperial College London and the author of Dark Matter, the new science of the microbiome. We also have Dr. Khurram Khan. He's a consultant medical oncologist. Stephen Rowley is a survivor of bowel cancer and a patient advisor at Digestive Cancer Europe. And elsewhere in London, we have Dr. Anisha Patel. She's a stage 3 bowel cancer survivor and ambassador of Bowel Cancer UK. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. And James, I'll come to you first. How concerned are you by the numbers you're seeing out there?
So I'm a consultant colorectal surgeon. My job is to remove bowel cancer from patients who unfortunately develop the disease. And I'm deeply concerned. My clinic is unfortunately now seeing lots of young people, and they typically have a similar story. Their story is that they've had symptoms of bleeding. Quite often they've been to seek help for their bleeding, but because they're young, sometimes their symptoms have been dismissed and not taken seriously. And what that means is quite often the young people that we see present with advanced disease, cancer that has spread to the liver or to the lungs, and it makes it much more difficult to survive. And it's extraordinary. In my lifetime, in my professional lifetime, I qualified as a doctor in 2001, we've seen quite a marked change in the presentation of this disease.
Thank you, James. Khurram, to you, the same question really. What are you seeing in your clinic? Is it backing up what James is saying?
Thank you very much, first of all, for having me here. So I completely echo what James has said. Incidentally, I also qualified in 2001, so we are probably a similar age group. So indeed, during the course of my training, I've seen a dramatic shift in terms of the young onset diagnosis of colorectal cancer. When I was in my training, I remember, anybody below the age of 50 probably we were looking at less than 5% of the patients in the clinic. And now that number has suddenly jumped up. If you look objectively at that, the CR UK figures reported that there's 6 to 8% rise every year in the incidence of colorectal cancer below the age of 50. If you look at more data from a recent paper published in JAMA, very credible journal, there's a high mortality in younger onset patients with colorectal cancer, which it tops actually in the US. So there is a very concerning trend. And we see this, unfortunately, in our day-to-day practice as well.
Thanks, Coram. Stephen, to you, just talk me through what happened to you and how you felt when you heard those words said to you that you've got cancer.
Well, I had bleeding, blood in the stool, blood in the toilet, and I thought I had piles, and went to the GP, and she said, yes, you've got piles, but I think we'll send you for a bit more investigation. And I'm glad she did, because very quickly the consultant, he identified that I had cancer in the sigmoid, and then I had surgery. They found it was stage 3C, and weren't quite sure it was very close to stage 4. So I had 6 months of chemotherapy after that.
And how are you now?
Well, I'm 10 years on now. So,
Congratulations.
and yeah, it took a lot out of me. And I was still going down like 6, 7 months after finished treatment. And I really had to get stuck into physical activity, exercise, to get myself out of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. Let's bring in Anisha. Anisha, just tell us your story. What happened to you?
So I was 39 and I was diagnosed back in 2018. Ironically, my husband's a gastroenterologist and a specialist in bowel cancer screening and removes early bowel cancer. So you couldn't really write what happened. I initially presented with a change in bowel habit, just constipation. And I'd had piles after childbirth, and I thought there was a little bit of blood on the tissue from the constipation, and it was very intermittent at the beginning and treatable. But obviously, as time went on, things were getting worse. I went to the doctor and I was diagnosed with stage 3B rectal cancer.
And how did you feel, Anisha, when those words were said to you in a doctor's room? I mean, it must have been confirmation of everything you'd feared.
Yeah, the room just went silent. And as a doctor, I know what that means. And, you know, my world came crashing down. I had a 5 and 6-year-old at the time. And actually the ripple effects of this kind of diagnosis, let alone when you have a young family, is just huge.
Thank you, Anisha. And great to see you looking so well and doing so well.
Thank you.
We're very grateful to all of you being on Roundtable today. James, why is this happening so much now and so often? What do you think is going on here?
Well, I have a theory, but before I present that theory, it's probably worth reflecting on the data. So we have lots of big epidemiological studies across the world trying to identify the reason for this. And we know that there are important dietary factors and lifestyle factors that correlate closely with it. So alcohol consumption, a diet high in westernized foods, ultra-processed foods, and low in fiber, for example, we know is a driver of it. But I think something more profound is occurring. And to answer that question, you have to place our discussion on cancer in a broader context. It's not just that cancer alone is rising in young people. Young people are experiencing a rise in their risk of many immune-mediated diseases. So diseases that happen when the immune system doesn't work very well. And that implies that there's something profound that perhaps is occurring that explains many of these different observations. Now, our bodies are populated by a really vast and very sophisticated and complex ecosystem of bacteria and microbes. And these are very, very important in programming that immune system and defining how they work. And what we think is really happening is that we're seeing a generational loss in that ecosystem. And that's happened really since the advent and dawn of antibiotics in the 1940s. And with each generation, that ecosystem gets corroded. So the way I think about it, a summary explanation to your question is, we're effectively experiencing an internal climate crisis. We're experiencing a catastrophic loss of diversity. We're experiencing an overabundance of pathogens that drive that disease. And then we, of course, stress those microbes with a poor diet, a poor lifestyle. And what you find is basically a bowel that ages disproportionately quickly at a genetic level. And then you find an increase in cancer risk.
So what you're saying is we've done this to ourselves.
Oh, yeah. The worst thing about my job as a surgeon is that the majority of the disease I operate on is entirely preventable. The majority of bowel cancer does not occur because you're born with a set of genes that mean you're going to get bowel cancer. You might be born with a slightly increased risk, but that risk is modifiable, and it's modifiable by doing very simple things, and I'm sure we'll talk about those things. So no, the risk of bowel cancer is not preordained, and you can change it. That's the gift of what we're really talking about today. It's about early detection, early screening, but it's also about understanding the mechanisms, and we're on a journey to do that.
Thank you, James. Khurram, what other factors do you think are contributing out there?
Yeah, so I think James has given an excellent explanation, which is what in layman's terminology we call as gut microbiome, the balance between the good and the bad bacteria. I'll not dwell too much on that. It's James' area of expertise. I think lifestyle changes we are well aware of, but one phenomena which is outside our generation's control is the cohort effect, okay, birth cohort effect. So there are few epidemiological factors which must be taken into account when we are seeing this shift in the age of the patients who are presenting much earlier. So why is it happening? Obviously hard to give a single explanation. But for example, people born after 1980 or late 1970s probably are exposed to too much luxury in life. So less, lifestyle, more relying on things like jets and, cars and machinery, and less physical exercise and activity.
Become lazy, is that what you're saying?
Exactly the case. And what it means is that a single individual patient that you're seeing in front of you may have a perfectly healthy lifestyle, okay? But this is the cohort effect of everything that has happened over the last few decades that we are experiencing now, and we're seeing it in our day-to-day practice.
Thank you, Khurram. Stephen, to you, what was your lifestyle like before diagnosis, and what have you changed since?
Yeah, well, I I thought I was quite healthy. I used to do quite a lot of dance for my fitness, but that dropped off after an injury, and I got scientific background, so I was pretty good on E numbers and things like that. But I realised that when I was young, teenager, our sort of bit of health advice was don't smoke, because that causes cancer, and try not to drink too much, because you might crash. But it wasn't, it wasn't really looking that far forward about impacts on your life or your health when you're older. I think that picture's completely changed now, and that young people really need to understand that what they're doing, their lifestyle choices have to, have long-term impact. So now, in the last 2 years, I've taken up running. As someone who's never run in their life before, I'm now running and enjoying it. There's the World Cancer Research Fund has done research on physical activity, and they recommend 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise a week. And everybody should be doing that. And that's a real challenge. That's a big challenge for a lot of people, especially someone my age.
Thank you, Stephen. Anisha, to you, what advice would you give to anyone watching anywhere in the world right now who perhaps has noticed something, a change? What advice would you be telling people to look out for?
Yeah, so I think it's really, really important that people know the signs of bowel cancer. We know from the Never Too Young study from Bowel Cancer UK that 1 in 3 people didn't know that blood in their poo was a red flag, and about 4 in 10 didn't know the symptoms of bowel cancer. And of those getting bowel cancer under 50, half thought they couldn't get it. So I think we really need to tackle that misinformation that is out there, that this is a disease, like I was taught at med school, of someone that's white, over 60, often male. That stereotype no longer exists. And we need to teach the people the symptoms of bowel cancer. And I always remember them with the acronym BOWEL, or try and teach people in this way. So B is for blood in the poo. O is for an obvious change in bowel habit. That could be diarrhea, constipation, or just a change. W is for weight loss with no explanation. E is for tiredness, and L is for a lump in the tummy or tummy pain. And it's not just young people that need to know about it, it's re-educating healthcare professionals as well, because being in that community, and Stephen will vouch for this, a lot of people feel they've been dismissed by their doctor when they first gone to them, because actually it was always thought of an older person's disease and told you're too young for cancer. But the fact is, you're never too young for cancer. The other thing I wanted to say is there is a group of us that don't have risk factors for cancer, for bowel cancer. You know, I was brought up in a family where my parents owned a health food shop. I didn't have processed food. We were vegetarian in the week. I ran an 8K obstacle course the week before, and I've got no genetics. And I think it's important that we understand that there are some risk factors out there that we've not found. And I'm working with Team Prospect, which is a global cancer grand challenge, which are looking at novel risk factors, because I think this is multifactorial. In fact, we know from the research so far it's going to be multifactorial. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. And that could be things like the environment, microplastics. And we know that there's certain bacteria in the gut, like colobactin, that also can contribute as well.
Thank you, Anisha. James, I turned 50 at Christmas, and lo and behold, last week,
39.
as a lovely present from the National Health Service, I got a letter inviting me for bowel cancer screening.
Yes.
How important is it that people like me, like anyone who turns that age, acts upon that?
It's critical, and it's really, really important. The first thing is, don't be embarrassed. This is just a routine thing. It's a simple fecal test. You take a sample, you send it off to the lab. It costs a very small amount of money, and it will tell you whether you have blood in the feces. And if that's the case, you might be called for a colonoscopy. These are life-saving treatments. I had a patient just last week. He was completely fit and well. The GP said, well, just do the test just to be sure. It was a microscopic amount of blood, and she had bowel cancer. So these things are life-saving. They're simple, they're easy to do. There's nothing to be embarrassed about, and you must do them. But I just want to pick up on one thing that Anisha has said and one thing that Steve mentioned. Anisha said she didn't have risk factors. And Steve's made some very important observations about trying to change risk factors in adulthood. The point that I want to make is that your risk of bowel cancer is probably not set by the time you reach adulthood. It is set in infancy and in childhood. And that is because it is the way that your microbes in your gut assemble and the way that they are constructed. And actually, it is the timing of the damage to that assembly that drives your risk of bowel cancer, right? So, for example, the number one risk being antibiotics. Antibiotic misuse in young people is epidemiologically well established to change your risk of bowel cancer. Pregnant women taking antibiotics have offspring at higher risk of bowel cancer. And so we need to think a little bit differently about this problem. We have to think about your gut as an ecosystem that needs to be protected. It's an ecosystem.
How do we protect it?
Well, you protect it by conserving it in the same way you would conserve any other ecosystem. The first thing you do is you stop damaging it. And the most important thing that you do is stop killing it with needless antibiotics. So what that means is if you have children or if you've got young families and your kids are sick and they don't need antibiotics and your doctor says to you, you don't need to have them, well, then you don't need to have them. If your child has a proven bacterial infection, of course, they need antibiotics. But then if they have them, then nutrition, diet, and protecting that ecosystem becomes extremely important. That's when having a high-fiber diet, plant-based foods, rejecting ultra-processed foods really becomes transformative. And so that's an opportunity to change. And if we are saying it as a generational change, that change has to start in early life. It has to start in childhood. There's no use thinking about it after the horse has bolted.
Thank you, James. Khurram, give me your thoughts on these ultra-processed foods that seem to be absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, this is the biggest challenge that we are experiencing in this day and age. You know, this is the quickest way. You know, I have a busy lifestyle, you have a busy lifestyle. So, you know, you run from, as a physician, I run from one clinic to another. What is the quickest fix I have? Just stand at McDonald's or any other similar chains and, you know, take processed food. I think that is the biggest challenge we are experiencing with the lifestyle and the adjustments that we need to make to ensure that the top priority is our own health. I think touching back on James's point, this is critically important, your initial question about the poo test itself.
Yes.
I think I'd really, really strongly encourage people to have that. In fact, if you compare the age limits in UK versus US, that's a separate debate, but even the younger people are encouraged to go for those tests. And if you look at it in a different perspective, so as a medical oncologist, I see patients, more than 50% of the patients present with disease that cannot be cured. So if you present early, your chances of cure are more than 80%. In fact, if you present it early enough, there's 90% chance of cure. And if you compare it to the data of having cancer, it's 1 in 2 risk of cancer. So in fact, you're almost like baseline, if baseline population, if your cancer is diagnosed early enough and cured.
So you think these home kits that people can buy and use at home, they're lifesavers, potentially?
Potentially.
Thanks, Coram. Stephen, I just want to talk about some high-profile cases that we've seen over the years. So there was the Hollywood actor Chadwick Boseman, who passed away at no age at all, an incredibly popular and talented young man. In the UK, Deborah James, known as Bowel Babe, who was an extraordinary campaigner. How much do their cases kind of educate people or get attention to a topic?
They really do. And I set up in 2020 a bowel cancer support group. We've got 8,500 members now. And in that group, we saw a big increase in younger people going and getting, going to see their GP because they had their awareness, aroused by Bowel Babe, and it created a lot of interest and activity within the group. A lot of people really got quite excited about going out and telling more people, and so it's become her effect is still going on. She's done an amazing job for it in this country. Yeah, I think any celebrity who gets a cancer and things like bowel cancer, prostate cancer, they could be taboo subjects, and really, people in the public eye, if they talk about them, it helps to normalise them and make them more accessible, and quicker, earlier diagnosis.
Thank you, Stephen. Anisha, how are you now, and how has cancer changed your life?
Big questions. Well, the first one is I am absolutely grand. I came out of surveillance after 5 years, after regular CT scans. I'm still having colonoscopies. I had my last one last year. I still had a polyp that had appeared from the time that I'd had the previous one 2 years prior. So I'm still really grateful that I'm getting them. My life has changed immensely. Good, the bad, the ugly. I think it's really changed things in a good way. I absolutely love advocating and helping raise awareness and following in the legacy of Dame Deborah James and the work that she's done. And, you really have a different perspective in life. People often say to me, I've lived in the last 7 years what some people live in a lifetime, because there's been that urgency to absolutely live, run a marathon with part of your bowel missing, go on TV, raise awareness and write a book. But I think what's really, really important is that we don't take our health for granted, that if something changes, people do go and get checked out, and that we wipe away that taboo, that stigma that James was talking about, because this is a treatable cancer if diagnosed early.
Anisha, what made you write the book?
Do you know, I wrote my way through cancer. It was the only way as a doctor I could feel like I had some control. The loss of control for me as a medic was really, really hard. So I decided to write my way through cancer under the name at Doctors Get Cancer Too. And someone said to me, quite a few people in social media said, you should write a book with this, because I wrote from the perspective of a doctor and a patient, and collated all the information I could along the way and shared my story. But also the most important bit, and I've spoken with James before about this, is I talked about managing life after cancer, because I tell you what, the fallout of bowel cancer treatment is huge. And as a 39-year-old woman, to be told that your fertility is going to be taken away, that you're going to end up with early menopause, I've got nerve pains in my hand and my feet, and I've got a loss of bowel function, I had a stoma for a while, is absolutely massive, let alone the emotional and mental health impact it's had. So I've really, really focused my energies on trying to help people, like Stephen has, navigate that life after cancer, which we just don't have that provision for and streamlined within our health service right now.
Well done, Anisha. Thank you. James, which countries around Europe in particular do you think are doing well on this?
Well, the Scandinavian countries tend to do very well, and countries that have national screening programs that bring young people into their screening programs early, because Karim is 100% right. This is all about early detection, and we know that those countries do very well. We know that some countries have much higher rates of younger people with bowel cancer, and we don't quite know why. So Ireland, for example, has a very rising rate in bowel cancer in young people. But what we also know is that in the global south, in countries, low and middle income countries, there is a dual burden of disease. These countries are now experiencing both the diseases of deprivation, but now increasingly a dual burden of westernization and rising bowel cancer rates. So if you go into sub-Saharan Africa, their guts are being changed. They're being changed by urbanization, they're being changed by the westernization of their diet, and they're now having to deal with this thing which they're not set up to deal with. So my point is, this is a global problem. This is not something we're just dealing with in Europe. This is a problem absolutely everywhere, and a global problem demands a global solution.
Karim, you're originally from Pakistan.
Yes.
Are the figures you've seen in your home country similar to what we see in Europe, or better?
Strikingly similar. And I echo what James has said, that in countries where, you know, the data sets are not that strong, there might be an illusion that the incidence or occurrence of the cancer is less common than in Western population. I don't believe that there is any, reality to that. It's simply the lack of the data sets. So in Pakistan, for example, they don't have that mature data sets to really be able to say what age groups are experiencing cancer. But I do go back home frequently for educational purposes, and I see much more severe and poor outcomes in patients who are diagnosed with cancer. Now, of course, that's multifactorial. You have less access to good quality services, less development in science, and not so much access to the treatments which are widely available.
Karim, thank you so much. Stephen, James and Anisha as well. Thank you all so much, and continued recovery to both Stephen and Anisha. Thank you. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. For now, from me and Brady and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.